Well, I'm in John Yeadon's studio. John is a Coventry artist, and we're discussing his exhibition of 1984, which just attracted the most extraordinary articles in the newspaper saying art show branded as porn. That was on the front page of the Coventry Telegraph. Then, of course, there were things saying it's smut, not art. And I've asked John to discuss why this exhibition caused such offence when we look at it today, and it's really extremely tame, especially if you compare it to the works of the Chapman brothers. So this was all extraordinary, and then recently John had another exhibition in Leamington Spa at a gallery, and again it made headlines saying that, fat art, it's enough to make you sick. That was the headline screamed that. And it said that a number of people who saw the exhibition had young children and were not impressed by what they saw. I've asked John to discuss this, and also the fact that this is beauty. If you go back to Sir Gawain, and this was interesting to me, because this grotesque realism is in fact hidden in romanticism in literature. You have Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, where where the poem we get to a part where they describe the beauty of the buffet and the sumptuousness, and at the same time the Green Knight comes in, and of course there's a whole part where Sir Gawain takes the head of the Green Knight. The cleanness of the strike cleaved the spinal cord and parted the fat and the flesh so far that bright steel blade took a bite from the floor. The handsome head tumbles onto the earth, and the king's men kick it as it clatters past. Blood gutters brightly against his green gown. Yet the man doesn't shudder or stagger or sink. So it's interesting. They have this fabulous buffet. It's a feast, and yet they're kicking a head around that they've just taken clean off a man, and then they simply carry on with a Christmas feast. And Arthur says to Gawain, "Now hang up your axe. One hack is enough." So it dangled from the drape behind the dais, so the men who saw it would be mesmerized and amazed.
I mean, I suppose what's true about romanticism and grotesque realism is that they're both ambivalent. I mean, that romanticism is both in awe, awesome, that you have a hero, and also that hero is a worm, and you have that sort of melancholy, negative side to romanticism. There's that image of the god and the worm, kind of in one, and like Byron's Manfred, sort of on the mountain, shaking his fist at God. That sort of holds kind of both the positive and the negative together. And the ambivalence in grotesque realism, according to Batkin, would be that the life and death in one, like the Sheila and the Giggs, the dying giving birth, the lower strata of the genital organs, of where waste and life-giving stuff are actually together. So it's those kind of contradictions, yeah. that I'm interested in, and certainly interested in ambivalence. Yeah, and romanticism does have that potential, I suppose, of being ugly. But I think they come out of the same tradition to some extent, like a symbolist tradition as well, as opposed to the classical tradition. I mean, in painting is different from literature, and they use the word realism slightly differently than they do in literature, and slightly kind of uncritically. I get so annoyed about the word realism being mixed up with naturalism. That realism somehow is about portraying what something looks like. But that's naturalism. That's what naturalism does. And I've even seen it in the Royal Academy, where they've had definitions of realism and naturalism, and they've actually got them the wrong way round, Yes, I mean, it's absolutely. So artists, and I've had endless arguments, the word realism is just used so casually and stuff, yeah. I tend to use it in the literary sense that it's ideological. And it has political kind of power and kind of stuff, yeah? And it means stuff, yeah? It has meaning, and it is essentially a kind of reference to the common folk, and are bringing down to a ordinary level, like the great burial at Onam by Kobe, that is painted as if it's this great burial of some king, some royalty, and in fact it's just a bunch of peasants, The Dirty Tricks exhibition, we actually took some counsel. We was aware that it was going to cause some problems at the Herbert Art Gallery, or potentially, because the Patrick Day, who ran the visual arts stuff there in those days, was quite aware that some people might get a bit upset. So we took some counsellors down to my studio, some Labour councillors who ran the council, and we showed them the work, and they thought one painting was a little bit over the top, but they'd misread it, of course, and I happily said, well, I won't put that one in. So showing willing that we didn't intentionally want to upset people or intentionally want to shock, they accepted that. And so when the Tory councillor shouts out after something like 3 weeks into the show, he's just noticed the exhibition, shouts out that, oh, this is horrible and this is terrible and this is pornography, the Labour councillors could stand up there and say, well, it's free speech and we don't think so. So I had them arguing for it. So it was a non-issue at all, yeah. The Coventry Evening Telegraph picked it up, and they said, it's art branded as porn, art branded as pornography. One critic said, well, he's not a critic. Well, he's not an art critic anyway. He was a Tory councillor, yes, and there's a lot of difference between an art critic slagging off something and a Tory councillor being offended, yeah. And I certainly didn't go out to offend people, unlike like the Chapman brothers, who these days, who actually intentionally wish to do that and wish to give the work no saving graces. That the work intentionally doesn't have any. The Chapman brothers intentionally wish to shock, and their work doesn't have any redeeming features, and intentionally doesn't have any redeeming features. They do that absolutely positively, yeah. That they make sure it doesn't have any redeeming features. So, but mine did. Mine had a lot of redeeming features. It was intended to, and the sexuality was there as a kind of political metaphor, which wasn't understood by many. Yeah, okay. It was castigated as not being art. He said it's smut, not art. Yeah, but I don't have a problem with it being art. I mean, there's loads of stuff in junior schools that everyone accepts as art. I mean, what other category could you possibly kind of put it into? agriculture, rock climbing. You know, I mean, it's art. Art is just simply a description of a category. What is implied is a value judgment by calling something art. And art, by calling something art isn't a value judgment. I mean, you have good art and you have bad art. So, I mean, I don't mind someone saying it's bad art. I mean, everyone's got their opinion and they perfectly, I mean, not everyone's going to like the stuff, you know, so you can't expect that. So that's fine, but to actually decry its category, I mean, it's painting in an art gallery. So why would you want to say it's not art? And the person that started this discussion off was in fact Duchamp, who questioned whether such a thing could be art. Then the son turns round and looks at the bricks and says, is this art? Well, that's a question Duchamp already asked. And in fact, that's the question that is partly being asked by the work. I mean, a friend who was at the Royal College of Art at the time did a mural. This was after the Dirty Tricks exhibition. We did a mural called Gyro City. And the council objected to this because Coventry wasn't a gyro city. You know, that Coventry was doing well, etc. So the council always bigs up Coventry, and it's their job. That's what they big it up. The title Gyro City came from Neil Kinnock, who said that Margaret Thatcher was turning this country into the gyro lands. So there you have a Labour council arguing the toss about a mural that is called Gyro City, disliking it being called Gyro City because that reflects badly on Coventry, whilst their leader in the Labour Party, Neil Kinnock, actually uses that phrase politically. So you can't have it both ways, yeah? But with Dirty Tricks, it was the Coventry Evening Telegraph that really stuck the boot in, and it was in an editorial, yeah, and to look at what is clearly they have been won over by the multi-syllabled. Well, I don't think my language is too difficult, yeah. Words woven by the homosexual painter. Now, who is ever described as a homosexual painter? I've never known Francis Bacon to be described as a homosexual painter. That's clearly a kind of dig, isn't it? Yeah. You know, painter into incomprehensible defence of his work. Incomprehensibly defensive, just not understanding what I'm saying. But I've always been fairly clear. Yeah. They believed, this is a criticism of the Labour councillors, of course. Yeah. Who believed they recognised the deep social symbolism that lay beneath the surface. Well, I thought that would be fairly obvious. Yeah. I mean, the exhibition was in the 1980s, and that was during the AIDS scare, and when there was a lot of anti-homosexual kind of stuff around. I mean, one got to accept that. I mean, it came from the government, and gays were blamed for the whole thing initially, anyway. And when I saw this happening, I decided to kind of fly in the face of it and do some kind of gay propaganda, to do some paintings that were propagandist in terms of homosexuality. I think that got up people's noses, you know, that one wasn't cowering in a corner because of that. I mean, in terms of gay liberation, a lot of progress had been made since 1968. Right through the 70s. I mean, slow progress, but progress was being made. And the AIDS thing sort of whacked it right back, you know. I mean, now the AIDS is a distant memory for many, and an unknown memory for most young people, for all the young people, you know. So the progress has been made, and you wouldn't dare write anything like this. But it's, I mean, you don't have to go too far back in the past to actually see enormous kind of bigotry and prejudice. You know, I mean, everyone thinks in terms of women's liberation and equal pay and various very positive, very obvious kind of things, you know, but they weren't always there, you know. And if you listen to the Beatles or the Rolling Stones, I mean, the way they talk about women is actually kind of, they wouldn't dare do that these days, you know? And if they were, they would be regarded as very laddish, etc. So we kind of forget that the past. I mean, like the past is a foreign country, and it really is. You don't have to go too far in the past to find a foreign country, do you? You know. There was a Coventry Artist Network meeting, and about meeting the press and talking to the press, and I brought it up that the Coventry Evening Telegraph had stuck the boot in, and was extremely homophobic in 1984, and everybody at that meeting said that this couldn't happen again. This wouldn't happen these days. Yeah, this couldn't possibly happen again. However, a couple of weeks later, the Coventry Evening Telegraph had another great article on me on an exhibition I had in Leamington, which was called Fat, the Mortality of the Eater and the Eaten, which they got wrong, and had Fat, the Morality of the Eater and the Eaten. And it said, fat art is enough to make you sick. Which is, which kind of, well, is in the criticism of the editorial in 1984, they said the power of censorship is a heavy burden to bear, but the argument for it becomes all too more plain when pictures such as these are displayed before even the most innocent of eyes. And the more recent one, on the Fat exhibition, it says, a number of people who saw the exhibition had young children and were not impressed by what they saw. To bring the thing of children in both cases, is as far as I can see, a last-ditch stand back against the wall in terms of censorship. And that somehow children are the lowest common denominator. I mean, I don't paint for children. I don't make art for children. And exhibitions that I've had in the past, like in the Phoenix Gallery in Brighton, we informed the police that some of this work might be difficult. They saw it, they said that's fine. I put a notice up saying children under 15 won't be allowed in unaccompanied by parents or an adult, etc. Show willing, you know. So I don't particularly kind of, you know, need children coming into my exhibition, yeah, but apparently that's the worst thing. I mean, if we were all to work to the lowest common denominator of something that wouldn't affect children or the mentally ill, none of us would do any work. You know. Would we? Yeah. I had an exhibition in Portugal. And everyone said, "Oh, John, it's Catholic country. It's going to be problematic. You know, it's going to have difficulty." And I said, "Well, you know, we'll see." Yeah. And when I was there, not a problem. Absolutely, just not a problem. In fact, at the opening, there were kids running around, and their parents, little kids, you know, and their parents just didn't mind it. I mean, if they understood the imagery, they thought it was funny. You know. I mean, they are innocent. It's adults that see all these demonic kind of things associated with genitalia and sexuality. So there was no problem in the Catholic country. I mean, in fact, what it was Protestant Puritanism that was the problem, that was the real censorship. And if you look at the history of this country, the history of our Renaissance, when the Pope was patronising, being a patron of Michelangelo and many other artists, they were whitewashing the paintings in the churches. They're iconoclasts. They were destroying the visual stuff in this country. So we have a history of not liking images. I mean, the children, in terms of the fat images, thought that the images I took from the internet, printed them small, but the children thought they were funny. The children were laughing at them, right? So that's offensive. That's not what one would want. Yeah? And I think the parents were just disgusted, right? For the wrong reasons. You know, I was attempting to make people look at these images in a different way than the sort of sensational way that they placed on the internet. And as a test, I printed them very small, so people had to get down and squint and really kind of look hard at them. It didn't work, you know. I mean, not everything works, yeah. So the intentions didn't quite happen how I thought I would have hoped that they would might, yeah. And the old sort of traditional, yeah, conventional way of looking at this sort of stuff, just the conventional way of viewing this sort of stuff prevailed. I mean, I wasn't putting these images up as beautiful images, you know, in any kind of way. As you said, there's websites where feeders actually really like these extraordinarily fat women. I wasn't. No, in fact, what was I putting them up as health warnings? I mean, I think there's many levels on which you can kind of view these, and I think those are all kind of interesting things. I was bringing up that discussion. I was asking for these other ways of discussing and looking at things. Wasn't my intentions. I don't impose my intentions or thoughts of ideas onto other people in that kind of way. When I had the exhibition on food in the Herbert Art Gallery, we had a seminar on eating disorders that was also extremely well attended by students who were doing the fashion course. Now that's really interesting because it's often fashion students who have fashion models that have anorexia, but also very fat people, obese people, clearly have an eating disorder as well. I mean, we only think of eating disorders in terms of thin people, but clearly very fat people have eating disorders. I have problems with an idea of beauty anyway. I mean, I don't do things which are beautiful, you know, yeah. I mean, it just doesn't come into my vocabulary, and I don't find it a very helpful word. I mean, art's supposed to be beautiful. I mean, I just don't know. And if you look up that art in the encyclopedia or the dictionary, it says beauty. If you look at beauty, that is, it says that the science. Oh, no, so look at art. Sorry, yes, the science of beauty, and to a lesser extent, the ugly. You know, so you've kind of got both in there, you know, already, you know, yeah. But I mean, I am interested in the over the top, the grotesque, as like in Rabelais, yeah, and so grotesque, enormous, large people fall into that kind of category. But of course, that's very dangerous, and it's seen as that you're poking fun at them, yeah, etc. Yeah, and the problem is treating people as objects, as the images do. I mean, I think that's offensive in itself. Interestingly, in the article from the Telegraph, it actually says the offensive pictures included one of a partly naked obese woman sitting on a bench vomiting. Another photograph, banned, showed a fat naked brunette stuffing an ice cream into her mouth. Well, talking about a woman as a brunette, I think that's kind of offensive, you know. Yes, I mean to actually the simple word that you identify that woman by her colour of her hair is kind of extraordinary and sort of like 1950s or something. Sort of, I mean, how do they get away with that? Yeah, it's amazing. I wrote a letter, which you can have, Maria, that I wrote to the Coventry Telegraph. They never published it. I didn't get a right to reply. I also sent it out to Artspace, which is the local Leamington artists group, for their magazine, and they didn't publish it. I suggested it could go in as an open letter, and they said they had no other correspondence in which it could go with. Well, that's a misunderstanding of what an open letter might kind of be. So I feel totally let down in terms of a right to reply. So if you may have it and do with it what you will.
And again, in Sir Gawain, there's the incredible passages of beauty And if you think that this was written in 1456, and already there were these notions that youth is beauty, and that that the older women were in fact not attractive at all, and compared to Lady Bertilac was there's a long description of that, which is very interesting. So I'm reading from Simon Armitage's Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. She was fairest amongst them, her face, her flesh, her complexion, her quality, her bearing, her body, more glorious than Guinevere, or Sir Gawain thought. She was hand in hand with a lady to her left, someone altered by age, an ancient dame, well respected, it seemed, by the servants, at her side. Those ladies were not the least bit alike. One woman was young, one withered by years. The body of the beauty seemed to bloom with blood. The cheeks of the crone were wattled and slack. Then it goes on. One was clothed in a kerchief clustered with pearls, which shone like snow on the slopes of her upper breast and bright bare throat. The other was noosed and knotted at the neck. And then it carries on. The grand old mother, the matriarch, she might be hailed. Her trunk was square and squat. Her buttocks bulged and swelled. Most men would sooner squint at her whose hand she held. So the notion of beauty was also interesting to me, because in John's exhibition of the morbidly obese woman stuffing cake into her mouth was actually from a website, and it was a website that celebrated these women because some men find them irresistibly attractive, and those men are called feeders. So the notion of beauty was also very interesting to me, and I asked John to discuss that. I was very intrigued to find out in Coventry. As you know, Philip Larkin, the poet, was born here and wrote all his juvenilia. All the work that was done in the juvenilia period was actually written in Coventry. And I was astounded to find out in my research that Philip Larkin was ignored by the council for a very long time because he was thought of as homosexual. And then again, the council took his poem, I Remember, I Remember. He wrote the poem when he was on a train, and the train suddenly stopped outside Coventry railway station. And he wrote a poem about it. And again, the council decided to remove they took the poem and put it up on the railway station. They then decided to take two of the lines away because they thought it was a criticism on Coventry, that nothing ever happens here. However, I found very interestingly in the archives the Umbrella magazine, which was a magazine celebrating art in Coventry in those days. And Philip Larkin responded to the criticism of the poem, saying that in an article that said, saying it's not the place's fault, but in the article he explains that in fact it had nothing to do with Coventry. It wasn't a slight on Coventry. It was merely that he was sitting in a train and that nothing ever happens if you're stuck on a train. So again, it has been Coventry Council, and whenever they seem to get involved in the arts, there seems to be a controversy, and they have uh, given a plaque at the railway station and written this poem, but they stuck a whole load of big screens on over this poem, so you cannot actually see it, and it's not really celebrated.